Okay, so disclaimer, obviously, right? If true crime isn't for you, then you probably shouldn't be watching this video. I got a bunch of other videos on this channel, and hopefully some more videos coming in the future. Really soon, actually. I got a bunch of ideas, and yeah. But disclaimer, obviously the victims in this video, rest in peace to them, and no disrespect to the victims or their families, but in this space we're literally just discussing events that have already happened. There's no intention of disrespect. This should go without saying, but I have a feeling that there's going to be a bunch, maybe not even a bunch, but just a few people in the comments that just don't understand the concept of true crime and just true crime analysis and true crime discussion, and they just take it as disrespectful to the families, to this, to this, to this. I'm just like, first of all, like, it should go without saying that it's not supposed to be disrespectful. It's not intended to be disrespectful. But if that disclaimer is necessary, if it's needed, then here you go. And obviously, if you continue to stay to watch the video, then trigger warning if you need that too. With that being said though, these 4 stories, you've probably heard them, not gonna lie, but these 4 stories are fascinating is the word I would use for at least 3 of the 4 of these stories. Absolutely. And one of them is completely fascinating to me. So yeah. So out of my list of cases that I'm going to discuss tonight with you guys, I think the first case that makes the most sense is actually the case of Jennifer Pan. Now, I say it makes the most sense because Netflix actually recently made an adaptation to her story, and you know, I thought it was cool. I thought it was good. I definitely think the Jim Can't Swim version, JCS psychology version on YouTube is a lot better. The Netflix, they tried to recreate some stuff, like it was, you know, they added some more footage that wasn't seen in the JCS video, and it was cool. But yeah, so when it comes to true crime, right, Jennifer's story is one of the most fascinating stories, and I think, funnily enough, I think I'm gonna say the same thing about 2 more of the 4 cases that I have for you guys tonight. But Jennifer Pan's story is so fascinating, not only because there's so much raw, you know, footage, interrogation footage that is released to the public on the internet, but just the story itself. Now, what I'm gonna do with these cases is I'm going to basically give you guys a rundown of what happened. We'll call that stage the rundown phase of the video, and then we're gonna just basically discuss it. So it's gonna be some nice chilled vibes, right? Chilled vibes. Listening to true crime, it's crazy. You and I are cut from a different cloth because I literally can fall asleep to true crime videos, non-ASMR style. Crazy. But anyway, the story of Jennifer Pan. So this girl, she's from Toronto, and basically she's this really good ice skater. You know, she's gonna compete in the Winter Olympics. She's really good. All of a sudden, as most athletes experience, she experiences an injury, but this injury kind of like literally ended her career, her ice skating career. She was a talent, but then her career ended, right? What ends up happening is her parents, right? And we're gonna get to the parents. But her parents wanted her to be successful in life, and if it wasn't through ice skating, it was for sure gonna be through something else, and the thing that they chose was education. The problem with athletes, right, most athletes, is when they put all their attention into competition, into the sport that they're training, they tend to not have much attention for school, right? So Jennifer was nowhere near as talented academically as she was on the ice, basically. But in her household, you know, she came from an Asian household. Even though they were in Toronto, she came from an Asian household. And me personally, I'm from an African household, right? And African culture and Asian culture, when it comes to education, are very similar. You know, parents expect a lot from children, right? And Jennifer Pan's parents were no different, but they were really, really, really strict. So Jennifer tried to reach out to her parents like, yo, like this education thing is kind of peak. You know, I'm not as good when it comes to education as I am with ice skating. Parents weren't hearing it. They basically like shunned her. They didn't really pay attention to it. They were just like, you better succeed no matter what. Jennifer had a drug dealer boyfriend. Jennifer started to fake her grades, like her test results. She started to fake them straight A's. She faked a university diploma, a high school diploma, and she faked a university acceptance letter. Paid like $500 or $1,000 for it, the university acceptance, or the high school diploma, one of them, right? Obviously she couldn't fake it all herself. She paid someone to help her fake it, right? So her parents were thinking that, wow, my daughter is on her way to become a lawyer, a doctor, something prosperous. But in reality, Jennifer was a high school dropout, and she was living with her parents, but she was seeing her ex on and off drug dealer boyfriend for like 8 years, I believe it was. I don't have any of the information in front of me. I just know these cases like the back of my head, like the back of my hand, because I just watch these videos all the time. Anyway, whatever. So eventually, as all things do, the truth comes to light, right? And her parents find out that she's been living this double life. My daughter is not on the road to prosperity. She's actually kind of like a failure. She's kind of a loser. High school dropout, living with a drug dealer boyfriend, like, you know. So what the parents decided to do was give her this ultimatum. Option one was, you can continue to live with us, but you have to, our regimen right now for you is pretty strict, but if you continue to live with us, option one is it becomes even stricter, like crazy strict. You can only leave this house for school, pretty much. You have to re-enroll into school, and you can only leave the house for school. You can't see your friends. You for sure can't see your drug dealer boyfriend. And yeah, you leave the house for school, you come back home, strict curfew, strict rules, strict everything. And option number two was for Jennifer to basically be disowned by her parents. Like, you can do whatever you want in life, but you're no longer considered our daughter. Long story short, Jennifer decided to create her own option, which was option number three. So this ex-boyfriend of hers, I believe his name was Daniel Wong. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, right? I'll probably correct myself once I'm editing this video if I'm wrong. But long story short, she got her ex-boyfriend, right, to hire 3 other men, right? Well, they were teenagers at the time, I think. She got her ex-boyfriend to hire 3 other people to basically stage a home invasion gone wrong and execute both of her parents. That's exactly what happened. One day, Jennifer decides to leave the door unlocked. 3 guys come in, you know, they ransack the house, they tie Jennifer up, kill both the parents, shoot both the parents, and then leave. Jennifer calls the police, and then she ends up in an interrogation room, right? And this is where the story pretty much starts in terms of what we are able to see in terms of the interrogation videos. This is where the absolute fascination of the human mind begins for us, right? At this point, Jennifer's a witness. You know, she's witnessed a horrible homicide. Both her parents killed. You know, it's crazy. So she was sworn in as a witness. It was voluntary as well. She didn't have to do this, but she was sworn in as a witness. She wanted to help the police with their case. But when it started to get hazy, when it started to get tricky, when it started to get spooky for Jen, was when she described how 3 intruders come into your house to take your, I guess, money, right? They kill your mum, they kill your dad, but they leave you tied up upstairs to the stairs, the banister of the stairs. Didn't really make sense. But what made even less sense, was the fact that Jennifer was able to make a phone call. This phone call was recorded, right? You got to hear the phone call. She was able to make this phone call while apparently her hands were tied behind her back. It's interesting how you're able to do this. During the interrogation, Jennifer, up until the point when she explained that, you know, my hands were tied behind my back, up until that point she was kind of flawless in her reimagining of the day, reimagining of the events that led up to the incident. But once she got to that point, like she knows she messed up, and it was the first time she kind of like, oh crap, like my story's a bit weird here. The detective himself, he probably started to think it too, but he did not react. He just let her continue her story. But I believe at that point he started to become suspicious of Jennifer and her involvement in the crime. Obviously, like, you know, she goes on to explain some stuff. She goes home. I think 10 days later they call her back. In the meantime, so unfortunately, RIP to Jennifer's mum, because she passed away. But miraculously, the father survived, bro. The father survives, right? Not only does he survive getting shot in his face, fam, but he also has all of his memory. This story is crazy. It's fascinating. It's like someone wrote the story, but it's not written. It's real life. It actually happened. So Jen's father, he recalls to the police that no, everything Jen said was fugazi, it was bogus. The people didn't come in and tie Jennifer up and do this and do this. Instead, what he said was, the father said that Jennifer was walking through the house with the intruders as if they were friends. Now obviously, because he got shot in his shoulder and his face, right, it's kind of, his memory could be foggy. The defense could argue that he's not a suitable witness because of those things, right? But him saying that, the prosecution was like, yo, like, this is crazy. We need to get that information out of Jen herself. Because obviously if you get a confession, that's like open shut case, right? Closed, right? And basically, long story short, Jennifer, she had to demonstrate how she got her phone. She retrieved her phone in order to make the phone call that she made. How she got it from her back when her hands were tied behind her back. Jennifer did not want to do this, but she didn't want to show the detective how she did it, because the mechanics of it were literally impossible. Somehow she finessed the situation, and she put her hands behind her back, she reached into her back pocket, she turned to the right side, and she was able to dial 911. Like, she actually finessed it, but it didn't really help her case, because in the last interrogation, she was pretty much broken down after hours and hours, and she finally confessed, right? Now, this this case is incredible. The text messages. So Jennifer and Daniel Wong, her ex-boyfriend, her drug dealer boyfriend, they were sending text messages, hundreds, maybe even thousands of text messages leading up to the day and during the day of the murders. And they got rid of the burners thinking that the police can't find it. For some reason, people are just retarded. Why do people think that the police can't get hold of this information? The police will always be able to get hold of that information. I don't understand why people do that. They use phones, they use technology, and they think the police won't be able to track it. The police uncovered hundreds or thousands of text messages, all incriminating. That's how they piece together this whole story, right? Crazy. Now, in terms of Jennifer's case though, I do want to make a point. Maybe this point is controversial, I don't know, right? But every time I think of this case, I always think, of course, now obviously no shit, what Jennifer did was horrible. It was a tragedy what happened, but what Jennifer did was horrible, and her parents are the victims of the situation. That's a fact, no cap, right? But like, Jennifer, they say when you repress something for long enough, it comes back with a vengeance, right? And I'm not blaming the parents for what happened to them per se, because like I said, what Jennifer did was horrible. But it's such a tragic situation because the parents were doing what they thought was necessary because they loved their daughter. If you can hear anything, I think it's storming outside. The rain is crazy, bro. This is crazy. Hopefully it relaxes you guys. The parents were doing what they thought best to help their daughter be successful in life because they loved their daughter, right? Yet they were literally doing, if you made a list of things that were helpful and things were unhelpful and you ranked them from best to worst, it's as if the parents picked from the bottom of the list. But in their minds, they thought it was the best option, it was the best thing to do. Yet for the actual kid, for the actual daughter in the situation, it was the worst thing you could do for her mental, for her in general, right? And it's so crazy when you think about that, because how can that be? How can it be like flipped like that? You know, you're saying you love this person, and I'm not doubting that the parents love Jennifer a lot. I think even when one of the intruders was separating Jennifer and her mum, she was calling out for Jennifer because she wanted to be with her daughter. They loved her, no doubt. There's no doubt in my mind. But it's like, it makes you think, in my opinion, that you should try to love your loved ones the best way that they want to be loved, if that makes sense. You shouldn't pick how you want to love people, because how you decide to love someone could actually be detrimental to them. I always think of this whenever I think of Jen's case. It's such a lesson, it's such an interesting, it's fascinating to me, honestly. But yeah, long story short, Jennifer got, I think she got indicted. Life in prison, I think. Last I heard, she was like 37 years old. You know, I think her case, funnily enough, her case got thrown out. And she has a new trial. But she's still gonna get like life in prison, but it's just interesting her case got thrown out over a technicality. But yeah, the 3 intruders were caught. Daniel was caught, Jennifer was caught. I think her father's name was Beekpan. He survived, and yeah, Jennifer's in prison now. The next case I'm gonna talk to you guys about, yeah, funnily enough, when I was making true crime videos, I wanted to make this video independently, like separately. Instead of putting everything together, I wanted to make this video itself, like a standalone video. This video I would have titled "The Jealous Police Officer," because this is the case, and you've pretty much probably heard of this case. You haven't heard of it with me though, and that's the beauty of these videos. This is the case of Stephanie Lazarus. Now that name is probably very, very, very iconic, mate, because it's like, wow, what a story. Like I said in the previous video, this story is fascinating. This is one of those fascinating stories. How it panned out is crazy, bruh. And if you haven't heard of it, like I said before, I'm gonna give you the rundown and then we're gonna discuss it. So in, I believe, 1986, like I said before, yeah, I don't have anything written down in front of me. It's just a messy table, literally. I just remember all this information because these cases, I've dissected these cases so much so that now I just know them like the back of my hand. I believe it was 1986, right? At this point, she wasn't married. So I guess her name wasn't Stephanie Lazarus, right? Maybe, whatever. Stephanie in 1986. Wait, hold on. I'm trying to think where I should start with this. Okay, let's just start with the hold tight. The victim, in this case, her name is Sherry Rasmussen. Sherry Rasmussen was married to a man called John Rutten. Not Rutten, Rutten. And in 1986, John came back home to find his wife, Sherry, dead on the living room floor. She was unrecognizable, like her face was severely beaten, and she had a bite mark on her forehand. It was just a crazy scene, right? What was even more alarming was the fact that after the autopsy, it was uncovered, that most of her injuries were inflicted on her after she was already killed. So her cause of death was 3 gunshots to the chest, which any one of those gunshots could have killed her. Like the first one, the second one, or the third one, they're all lethal, fatal. But most of the injuries that she suffered came after that, because of the lack of hemorrhaging to the injuries. You know, if you were still alive and blood was coursing through your body and shit, let's say someone punched me in the eye, after like 10 minutes my eye would swell, right? Because, you know, that's just how the body heals. That's what happens with the body when you get like blunt force trauma, right? But there was the lack of that. There was none of that, but it was still a lot of damage. So that's how they determined it, right? At the time, this case is so weird. So that same night that she was, or that same day, whatever, the space of the day, like the space of 24 hours, on the same street, there was another break-in, robbery, gone wrong, whatever the fuck. So in that case, I guess the witnesses were like, yo, it was these Mexican men, these short Mexican men or whatever. So the police in this case, in Sherry Rasmussen's case, just assumed that those are the 2 suspects in the same case. So the one that happened 24 hours ago was the same people that did it here, on the exact same street. Well, obviously it wasn't those men, and they had no other suspects, so the case was closed for 23 years. The case went cold. It wasn't closed, but it was cold. Cold, bruh. This case is crazy. Fast forward 23 years later, right? I think it was the LAPD. It was the LA police, right? They just started to look at old cases, and they were like, yo, like, this case right here involves a police officer by the name of Stephanie Lazarus, and she literally works right outside. And when I say it involves her, John Rutan, the wife of Sherry Rasmussen, had dated Stephanie Lazarus back in high school. Sherry and Stephanie didn't like each other. Obviously, it's like a side chick, main chick thing, like Effie and Lauren from Power Book Ghost. And so the police were like, yo, this is a cold case, let's just see like what happens. I don't want to say they reopened the case, but they just started to like dig around and see what went. They looked at the autopsy, they said, yo, they found DNA on Sherry Rasmussen. Remember that bite mark that I told you at the beginning of the video that she suffered on her forehand? Well, at the time, someone took a DNA swab and kept that DNA for 23 years, bro. This case is insane to me. The two Mexicans, the two Latin men that were the prime suspects before, 23 years later, the detectives working the case were like, we feel like just of what we know, side chick, main chick, DNA was found. The DNA, by the way, back in the day, obviously they didn't have the utensils, they didn't have the minerals, they didn't have the technology to, they didn't have the technology to test that DNA. Basically, they took the DNA sample, but they didn't have the technology to do their thing. Obviously, 23 years later, we got that still. I think this was 2009 when this happened. Long story short, since the DNA was tested and it was found to belong to a single female suspect, they decided to make Stephanie Lazarus the prime suspect to the case. Case was reopened, and all they had to do was basically retrieve Stephanie's DNA. One day, I think also a coffee cup that Stephanie discarded was retrieved, tested at the lab. What do you know? 100% match to the DNA found on Sherry Rasmussen's bite mark 23 years ago. Pause. What are the odds, that in a fit of rage, right, you've already killed the woman, R.I.P. to Sherry Rasmussen, you already killed her, you already beat her up. What are the odds that a decision that you basically subconsciously made, I don't even think she thought about this, it was just like this primal, animalistic, urge to bite her after you already killed her, to bite her. What are the odds that someone 23 years ago took that DNA, even though they couldn't test it, took the DNA, kept the DNA, and 23 years later, that was the reason you got caught? This bitch, Stephanie Lazarus, walked for 23 years. She was in the police force at this time. She was like 50 years old or some shit. Top tier in the police force. She was a tip top. She was the head of like art thefts and art crimes and shit. She was a tip top woman. She elevated, done her thing, married to a guy named Scott, I think, some shit. I think it's Scott Lazarus, which is why I don't think her maiden name was Stephanie Lazarus, probably something else. Anyway, what are the odds in that, bruh? Again, this case, it feels like it was written, but it's real. If you haven't seen the interrogation on YouTube, the 4 interrogations on YouTube, guys, I can't tell you how many times, me personally, I've watched the 4 interrogation. I think I've watched the 4 interrogation at least 50 to 60 times, and I'm not even joking. I'm a weirdo, so I can actually fall asleep to interrogation videos. I'm weird. I'm weird. I'm weird. I'm weird. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend watching it, but be prepared for frustration. Be prepared to be frustrated. Be prepared to really hate someone, because I hate Stephanie Lazarus. Her facial expressions, yo, this bitch. What the police did, obviously, because she's a police officer and they didn't want her to like request legal advice right away, like off rip. They had to disguise the conversation as a casual conversation and not an interrogation. They also needed her to give up her gun, so they basically called her for a meeting in an interrogation room. But the only reason they did it in an interrogation room is because to enter the building to the interrogation room, Stephanie had to give up her gun. And she'd give up her gun, but she wouldn't suspect that there was anything fishy. It was big brain. It was a big brain play, big brain move. The detectives on the case were absolutely flawless. Stephanie, yo, like I said before, I don't want to like give too much away about the actual interrogation, right? But if you care about this kind of stuff like I do, you need to watch this interrogation if you haven't seen it already. Crazy interrogation footage. It's so fascinating. The human mind, the psychology of it. When you get caught in a lie, you know, when you're sitting in front of someone that you know is guilty 1000%, like it's open and shut, like you know they're guilty, and you're asking them point blank questions and you're watching them lie to your face, like you're watching them tell you lies. It's I don't even know how to describe it other than fascination. Like if I was sitting in front of her, I'd be pissed at her, to be fair, but at the same time I'd be like, yo, it's like I'm in awe of your trickery. It's like when you see a kid and you ask a kid, did you do this thing, knowing that the kid did it, the kid will like deny it in every way possible. But when an adult does it, when someone that's like 50 years old does it, and it's very similar to how a child would do it as well, right? Because a 50-year-old is literally just a child, but 50 years later. Do you see what I'm saying? So we're not like different species to kids. We were kids and we still have those tendencies. We learn to lie very young, and how you lie when you're a kid, you pretty much lie the same way when you're an adult. It's just more intricate, right? Crazy case. The next case that I want to talk to you guys about is the case of Alec Manassian. I think his name is Alec, right, with a K. And if you guys don't know, he is the guy that in Toronto, he's the incel, the involuntary celibacy, right? Who basically went against the order of the world and tried to inflict damage on the world. It was like a beta uprising against the quote-unquote Chads and Stacys of the world, and we're gonna get into that. This story right here, yeah, it's not even a story, because to be fair, the story is pretty basic. It's a virgin incel who was mad, very similar to Elliot Rodger. Everyone's heard of Elliot Rodger's story, but it's very similar to that. Someone that's mad at the world for basically not being able to get laid, basically not being able to find a woman that loves him, etc. And then they do the most irrational thing, because they're very delusional. Incels are mostly delusional people. They blame the women for not wanting to be with them. They call themselves gentlemen, supreme gentlemen, and they blame the women for not wanting to be with them, so they want to punish the women for not wanting to be with them. Anyway, so the story itself is very basic. Alec Manassian, he was part of, and we're going to get to this because there's a lot to discuss, but he's part of some pages on 4chan, on Reddit, where they have these communities, and you know, he was basically groomed into doing this act, this rebellious act, quote unquote. And yeah, long story short, he hired a van and drove it onto the curb and killed, I think, 11 people, 12 people, random people, which doesn't really make sense to what his goal was. But anyway, none of it really makes sense, because incels, when they get like this, when they get to that point where they're just like, yo, they just do crazy shit, that school shooter shit, that suicidal shit, that mass shooter shit, mass homicide, mass shooting shit, they don't really make sense. Like, what they're doing is very illogical, so it doesn't actually make much sense. But why I wanted to talk about this story and why this story is so fascinating to me is because of Alec Manassian himself. Alec Manassian is autistic, and I don't remember where I saw this, read this, or whatever I did. But I read somewhere that his autism, Alec's autism, it didn't affect what he did. If he wasn't autistic, basically, he would have still done the same thing. It's just during the interrogation, he would have had more self-preservation. If you watch the interrogation, Alec is he's literally an open book. He gives the most blunt, truthful, honest answers to everything. The detective would ask him, yo, why did you kill this person? He'd literally sit there and say, well, I killed them because I wanted to inflict as much that, like, this interrogation, I said this about the last two, I think, is one of the most fascinating interrogations I've ever seen, bro. I kid you not. Because when I say there's zero self-preservation, he tries to preserve his own family. Like, when he's asked questions about his family, he's like, I prefer not to speak, I prefer not to answer. But when it comes to himself, he's literally an open book, and it's crazy, it's so fascinating. But back to what that person said, yo, his autism didn't affect it. I doubt it. I don't think that's true. I think the fact that he is autistic affected his actions severely. It seems so obvious to me, right? Maybe I'm wrong because I'm not a psychologist, innit? But I see what I see in the video, and I'm just like, yo, this guy is, he has manners. He's so orderly. He's so, normal. He doesn't seem to have anything wrong with him mentally, other than the fact that he is autistic and doesn't understand, human emotion, right? And obviously, like I said, disclaimer, obviously, the victims are the victims. This is obvious, but a part of me just feels so sorry for Alec Manassian, because I'm like, yo, you really got into the wrong crowd, bro, and you ended up doing something devastating, and now you're in jail for the rest of your life because of what you did, not necessarily because of who you are as a person, if that makes sense. That's how I feel. He did something so heinous. He murdered 11, 12 people. But he himself, I'm looking at a guy and I'm just like, yo, you seem to be like a wonderful person. It's so weird, it's so trippy, bro. Yo, shout out to the detective in this case. This detective was sensational, 10 out of 10. I can't remember his name. He says it right at the beginning of the interrogation. He is so good at his job. Maybe if this series of videos continues, I'm going to show you examples of detectives that are objectively horrible at what they do. I don't know how they became senior detectives at all. And it's so interesting how a lot of these cases, they come down to confessions. Not this one, because this one has mad evidence. Like, you were the guy in that truck that killed all these people. Like, this was open and shut. They just want to have a conversation with Alec Manassian. But in Jen's story, for example, And in the last story I'm gonna bring up in this video, for example, in order to crack the case, you literally needed a confession. And only a good detectives could maneuver that and use the correct techniques to get that confession. But in other cases, the detectives on the case was so bad, and it always makes me wonder, like, if this bad detective that I'm watching in this case was the detective in this case, this person right here would be walking free, because that case would not have been cracked with that bad detective. So it's like, yo, how do bad detectives even become senior to the level where they're interrogating an actual criminal? You know, they're not just in the room learning and just sitting there just being quiet and just learning from the actual, you know, chief detective. They are the chief detective. And I'm looking at you, I'm like, you actually suck. Oh brother, this guy stinks. Bruh, how did you get this role? And the role is so important, because if you fuck it up, this is a criminal who can get away with a crime. Is someone who can get away with murder, like Annalise Keating and the Keating Five and them, man, the murderers out there. Favorite show, by the way. But yeah, cases really depend on how good or bad the detectives are. So I don't understand how the bad ones slip through the cracks. Anyway, yeah, man. Alec Manassian, again, if you haven't seen the full interrogation, I would, out of all the ones I mentioned so far, yeah, this one I would recommend the most. I said that I watched like Stephanie Lazarus's video like 50 to 60 times. I think I've watched Alec Manassian's, and I kid you not, over 100 times, bro. And it's like almost 2 hours long, and I'm not even joking. Damn, my mouth is dry as shit. The last case that I want to talk to you guys about is probably, out of all these cases, the most famous case. And it's the case of Chris Watts. I know everyone in the true crime universe, like myself, just shivered at that name, because he is so infamous in the true crime space, sphere, world, universe. Chris Watts is basically the family killer. Chris Benoit murders his whole family, his 2 kids. What are their names, bro? Celeste and Bella. Murdered his wife, Shanann. Staged it to be like, Chris is a weird guy, bro. Okay, should I give you the rundown? I will. Yeah, I will. Basically, Shanann's best friend was supposed to take Shanann, and I guess the kids, but Shanann to the hospital. The next day, she brings her back from some place at like 3 AM in the morning. The next day, because Shanann was pregnant, she was going to take her to the hospital. Next day, she doesn't receive a phone call from Shanann. She's like, well, gone for that. She goes to Shanann's house. She finds Shanann's car there. She finds, I think, her slippers or her shoes that she wears every day still in the house. Like by the door, she can see through and see her shoes are right there. Her car's still there, but no one's responding. So she calls the police. The police, obviously, they don't have a warrant to enter the house, so they're just like, you know, looking around, seeing what they can investigate. Whoa. They call Chris, who's the husband in the situation. He's like, I'm around the corner, I'm 5 minutes away. First of all, they think that the wife might be having a medical emergency inside the house. And Chris tells the police, you cannot come into my house. I am 5 minutes away, bruh. You wait for me to get to the house. Sus. Chris gets to the house, goes into the house, lets the police and Shanann's best friend into the house. Yo, Chris, in the body cam footage, Chris is acting mad sus. This guy is sus, bro. Sus. He's avoiding questions, he's on his phone, he has no panic. None. This next thing that happens though is pretty much what cracked this case. time I watched the body cam footage of Chris Watts, yeah, and you hear the neighbor talk, I'm like, yo, the neighbor nailed him, bro. Absolutely got him. Before the police, before the interrogators, before, you know, everyone else, before anyone else sussed it, before anyone else was like, yo, the neighbor got him, bro. I'm like, yo, wow. The neighbor basically has a camera, like a Ring camera, and he's able to see Chris loading his truck and leaving like at 5 in the morning. He's able to basically determine that Shanann and the kids never left the house, but Chris left the house at 5 a.m. Basically that Chris is the only one that left the house. Chris is acting all sus, and then Chris leaves the neighbor's house, and the neighbor is now left with the police officer. The first thing the neighbor says to the police officer is, he is not acting right at all. Got him. Perfect, he said. All this pacing around, all this movement, no sir, he's not acting right at all. He's looking like he's trying to cover his tracks. Boom, bro. The neighbor got him. It's crazy. Off rip before anything. The neighbor sussed it because the neighbor had the basically the relationship-ish with Chris enough to know that in this situation the police officer hasn't met you from a hole in the wall, so he's just looking at you act the way he thinks that you act. But the neighbor who knew Chris a little bit before knew that you were not acting right, my guy. Something is fishy here. And Chris, of course, became the immediate prime suspect. I think the next day, Chris agrees to be interviewed by 2 different news crews. Weird guy, man. Long story short, he fails a polygraph test. Again, the detectives are brilliant in this case. They use all the right techniques to basically get the confession out of him. You know, they use the technique of like admitting to a lesser crime. Chris gave them the phone in order to like track Shanann's movements and shit, but they were just looking at Chris's phone. They found hundreds of deleted text messages, basically determining that Chris was cheating on his wife. Chris lied to that. He lied about that. But then as they were applying the pressure, he admitted to it. He's like, I cheated on her. Out the blue, he's like, I cheated on her. The detective's like, we know. We found the text messages. And that was the first breakthrough. Long story short, they break his ass down. His dad comes in. He admits to killing Shanann because Shanann, he found Shanann basically killing his daughters in the process of killing his 2 daughters. So he had to kill Shanann, and what he ended up doing was throwing his 2 daughters inside an oil ring, like a basin of oil, and digging Shanann a shallow grave and putting her right there. This is the story that Chris went with. Very strange guy. When he first walked into the house and he opened the door for the police officer and their best friend or whatever, he comes out with a ring, Shanann's wedding ring. This was his story that he planned in his head, how he's gonna make it look. Hey, yo, police officer, the girls, they're blankies, they're gone. Bella and Celeste, they're blankies, they're gone. They don't leave anywhere without their blankies. He basically put it out to say like Shanann ran away. He staged the crime scene to look like Shanann ran away. But then the next day, in the interviews with the radio news stations and in the interrogation with the cops, his whole narrative, his whole game plan completely changes. It's like he forgot the original game plan, the original strat, and he was like, yo, I don't know who took them. Yo, whoever took them, it wasn't me, but whoever took them, please bring them back. Yo, whoever took them, I want to see my girls again, please bring them back. And it's like, yo bro, did they run away? She left her wedding ring, the girls' blankies, they left, so I guess the blankies just magically disappeared, because if they didn't leave, be like, yo, what do you girls need from him? The girl's like, yo, before you take me away from my house, can I bring my blankies, please? Before you take me away from my house, can I leave my wedding ring on the table, please? Obviously, that wasn't the case. And yeah, man, Chris Watts, man, he's in jail right now, of course. I think he pleaded guilty to the charges of strangulation of his wife, and then pregnant wife, by the way, and then the smothering of his 2 daughters. Crazy. Chris lost a lot of weight, and basically he didn't want to be with Shanann no more, so he decided the best option was to erase his previous life with his 2 daughters and unborn child and his wife, so he can start his new life with the woman, I think Nicole Kessinger, with the woman that he found and was having an affair with. It's crazy when you see Chris. He seems like a normal guy, but he is a complete psychopath, bro. He has no emotion. It's like the times that he showed emotion, it felt like he was just emotional about himself. It was more self-preservation. It was like, yo, I messed up for myself. Like, I am going to jail. I am going to be punished for this. He didn't really have, remorse for his daughters. Completely disconnected. Of course, no remorse for his wife. But his daughters, bro, like, completely failed the lie detector test. Failed it. I don't even know why he agreed to take one, knowing that he wasn't going to pass it. Again, like I said, the 2 detectives, the female lie detector detective and the male chief detective, excellent. Especially the female lie detector, she's amazing. She was like, yo, I'm really good at lie detectors. I got the best training, I got the best experience. I'm sick at this. They did a trial test for the thing. She's like, oh man, I'm so happy right now. Chris is like, why? She said, yo, you are a horrible liar. I'm so happy that you suck at lying. Like, go watch the interrogations if you haven't seen them. But yeah, yeah, Chris Watts stories. Proper psychopath, bro.